Hi everyone, Mittierim here again with another top 5 video. And today we're going to look at my top 5 worst game mechanics in games that I otherwise enjoy. So let's go ahead and get into it.
Number 5!
So, number 5 is the Bard class from Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 1st Edition. Now, for those of you who are not aware, the Bard class appeared in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons in the back of the Dungeon Master's Guide in an appendix. The reason for this was it wasn't a normal class. You actually had to master several classes before you were allowed to become a Bard, of all things. Starting with, you had to have approximately 5 levels of Fighter. Then you had to transfer Dual class, which was a headache in and of itself, into a Thief. Before you went on to a spellcasting class and received druidic training. So you were really, if you went through it by the numbers as quick as you could, you were probably a 9th level character or more before you could have your first level of Bard. And really what they got for it was not really worth it. It was really just a headache. It was very confusing, and it, for the most part, was unplayable. So I'm much happier in 2nd edition when they made the Bard a standard class and much easier to gain access to. But it's just a headache, and there was no real reason for it. So definitely one of those rules that I would probably just have ignored. Number 4 worst mechanic is going to be fear spells, mainly from Dungeons & Dragons, 1st through 3rd editions, or 3.5. Really, the reason why I think these are bad mechanics is that they strip agency away from the players. I'm sure everyone who has played for a significant amount of time has a story about how bad it sucks to have finally faced down the terrifying banshee that's the center point of the adventure, just to have you fail a single saving throw and turn around and run like a chicken, and essentially have to flee for the whole combat or more. Now, there are certain fear effects that these games did better, like Dragon Fear, for example, actually just gave you a penalty to hit and damage instead of making you flee, and I think that's, in general, a much better way of doing it. But it's terrible to be one of those players who has to essentially miss out on a really awesome encounter just because you rolled a single die roll badly. And even more so than, say, a save versus death effect where you just drop dead, there's really an impact on the role-playing of the character when you've essentially turned chicken and abandoned the rest of the party, even though it was a magical effect. So I certainly think that my players at my game hate fear effects more than, like, Finger of Death. I think they would rather die than be forced to be a coward. So I definitely think that's one of those game mechanics that really can cause a headache and generally leech fun away from the table. Number 3 is the merits and flaws system in the White Wolf games, Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf, the Apocalypse, etc. The real reason I don't like this, and I very rarely actually played with the merits and flaws system, is that they seem to be kind of all over the place. You've got some that are just absolutely crippling, and I couldn't imagine you actually trying to play a character with them. Then you've got some that are so minor that it's like, who cares? And the problem is because points and the dots you get in dice are so important, you almost feel like if anybody's using merits and flaws, you almost feel like everyone should. And I just never thought they had a very good selection. Very few of them felt particularly fitting to the games. There were a few that were tied in directly to things, but they were all kind of generic. So in general, I never really thought much of them. And I definitely think it was kind of a lackluster waste of space that could have easily been clipped out for more world flavor and that sort of thing. So for most of the White Wolf games that I've run, I just went ahead and skipped those. Number 2 is going to be the initiative system in Aces and Eights. I believe this is also the same one used in the current edition of Hackmaster. Aces and Eights is a Western-based game, historical fiction, made by Kenzer & Company, the same company that did the Hackmaster role-playing game. This game frustrates me. I think it may be one of the most beautiful, best researched, just great games that is almost completely unplayable. The reason I say that is mainly because of the combat system, and I kind of hinge it all on the initiative, which is based in tenths of a second, and it's a constantly increasing number. So, for instance, you draw a weapon. The initiative, if it takes 0.3 of a second, the initiative count goes 1, 2, 3, your weapon is cleared. Then, from the point of the weapon being cleared, it may take 0.2 of a second to cock it. Then a few tenths of a second to actually fire, and those things keep going on. And it's an amazingly detailed system, which is kind of necessary to cover the sort of cinematic gunfights of the Old West that probably never really happened. But it's so slow, and it just bogs down. I've had a single gunfight duel in Aces and Eights take nearly 2 hours to resolve, and it was like 4 or 5 shots. And it's super long, and I couldn't imagine running a long-term campaign in it where there's any sort of combat. It's definitely an interesting game, and it's well thought out. Skill set's great. There's a lot of other great things about it, but for a setting where you're going to want to have climactic gunfights and stuff, I could not imagine actually running it. It would be so mind-numbing and take so long, which is really my biggest frustration with the whole system. So it's really a shame that kind of one set of mechanics can ruin what is otherwise one of the best gaming books I've ever seen.
Number 1!
And for the number 1 worst game mechanic in a game I otherwise like, we're going to go with the feat system for D20 Star Wars. Now, obviously, you all are saying, well, D&D 3.5 had feats too, and you're absolutely right, but I didn't like that game, so it doesn't qualify here. So we're going to talk about Star Wars instead. Basically, Star Wars D20 was kind of a copy and paste of the 3.5 rules. Had a little bit of the influence of D20 Modern in it, but they kept the same horrible feat system, and I don't like the feat system for a number of reasons. It made character creation too cookie cutter, because there were only like 6 decent feats that existed. So if you had a certain type of character, you pretty much had to have X feat tree so that you can get the few good feats that existed. The feats really didn't do much to build a unique or interesting character, which was their primary marketing strategy for bringing them in. And I really just don't think they fit the Star Wars feel, which is a shame, because I liked the skill system for D20 for something like Star Wars, and I wasn't really as bothered by some of the other mechanical changes for that game as I was with say D&D going into it. But the feats thing just hung around that system like a stone, in my opinion. Now this, I think, got worse in the Saga edition, because you had your class features as well as the feats that kind of worked in the same sort of tiered structure. And it just eventually, as books came out, you just got buried in them, and it took longer and longer to make a character because you were searching all of these books, and it really started rewarding game mechanic mastery as opposed to making an interestingly narrative-focused character. So, for me, it ended up ruining that game. I played Saga for a little while, and I'll still go back and play the Saga edition before I go do D20. But the feat system was really, in my opinion, the worst mechanics in those kind of games. Thank you guys for watching, and if you like this video, please like and subscribe. We'll catch you next time.